Okay, so I told you guys a while back I would do a video on the Chinese economy, and that is what we're doing today. So let's get into this. As always, just to keep it in mind, I'm not going to get super technical in these videos. This is just meant to be a kind of an overview of looking at different topics through an economic lens. So it's not meant to be complicated. It's just meant to be very basic and just it's more of an explanatory video. So let's talk about this. So the Chinese economy, why does it matter? Why are we talking about it? Why do you hear about it in the news all the time? Well, because they're the second largest economy in the world. Okay, the US is number one, China is number two. It was estimated back in the early 2000s to mid 2000s that they would surpass us as number one economy in 2020. Well, that's not happening. But why? Why is that happening? So we're going to go over just two variables of why this is not happening. We're not going to go into every facet of the Chinese economy because that would be hours and hours and hours, really days worth of information, which we're not going to do in one video. So today we're just going to go focus on two things, okay? The first one is going to be gender disparity. And the second will be the rise of the middle class. So the first one, let's talk about this. So gender disparity, why does this matter? I've had people ask me, well, isn't that more of a social issue, not an economic issue? And no, it is very much an economic issue. So let's talk about why that is. So as we all know, back in the 1970s, China implemented the one-child policy, which meant that each family could only have one child within their household. So why does this matter? Well, it matters because now you've got missing people in the population, and the replacement rate is quite low. So how did all this happen? Well, when you implement the one-child policy, immediately right there, the replacement ratio will drop. So what is the replacement ratio? It's the ratio of the rising generation, or basically how many kids you have, to replace the people that are having them. So basically, if you have, a woman and a man, and they get married and they have kids, they are going to, let's say, have two kids. Okay, well, the replacement ratio is then 2, which is basically neutral. So there's 2 people to replace the 2 people that made them. If you have a one-child policy, for every 2 people, you only have 1 person replacing them in the population. So this causes a problem. The other problem is that you have in the culture very much a preference of boy babies over girl babies. And so a lot of females are missing within the population. So why is any of this an issue? How does it even play out economically? Well, let's go over this. So let's talk about why the replacement ratio, first of all, is of any concern. Okay, so this is kind of like what the US population looks like. Okay, we have the baby boomers, which is a huge population. We have the Gen Xers, which is a smaller generation or smaller population. And then you have the millennials, which is a much bigger generation. So as far as population numbers, this is what it looks like. It looks like almost an hourglass figure, okay? But the Chinese economy looks very different. So the Chinese economy looks more like this, where it's very top heavy with the previous generation. So basically the baby boom generation here. And then you've got a very much narrowing of the population. There's no more, like in the US, here we flare out with the millennial generation. And you don't see that with the Chinese population. So why is this an issue? Why does it even matter? Well, it matters because one of the biggest competitive edges of the Chinese economy is the sheer size of their labor force. They are able to, produce a lot of goods for fairly cheap because they have this huge labor supply. And so, and they can make everything in the masses because they have the labor supply to support that type of production. Well, if you have this narrowing of the population, well, then you're having less labor supply, right? And so then that starts to become an issue. So when the one-child policy was initiated, they were not looking at the long-term effects. They were looking at the more immediate effects, which was to make sure that they had enough, um, uh, goods and services to support the citizens of the sovereignty. Now, this doesn't justify the one-child policy, but that was part of the reason that they enacted it. This isn't all the reasons, but this was one of the major ones. But they did not look at the long-term effect. They were just looking at the immediate effect. They did not look at the long-term effect, which was that you would have this shrinking of the population, and the workforce would no longer be there, at least not to the same magnitude. So the one-child policy had this unintended consequence that they were not looking at. The other one that they didn't consider is that because, again, male babies were very much preferred over female babies, you were missing a ton of the females out of the demographic within the population. So the male to female ratio is not on par. It's at very much a disparity. So why is this also an issue? Well, women are becoming much more selective about who they're marrying. They're delaying when they're getting married, which means that they're delaying also when they're having kids. That, again, also kind of compounds the problem with the replacement ratio dropping within the population. So these are some big factors that are playing against the Chinese economy currently and for the future. So on top of that, you have this huge, aging base up here that need care. And right, wrong, or indifferent, pretty much in any culture, the caregivers are women. The unpaid labor that gets produced in almost any economy, it's in the billions and billions and billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars. And so that's also missing out of the Chinese economy right now. This is a big enough issue, and it's serious enough that back in 2011, 2012, the Chinese government actually implemented a law that allowed the senior citizens to sue their families for emotional or financial or both support. So if they felt that the family wasn't doing enough to support the elderly, then within their family, then the elderly family members could actually sue the younger family members. That's how bad it's gotten, because the Chinese government's like, we don't want to have to pay for this. We don't want to mess with it. You guys deal with it. So they implemented this law. So you can see how this is very much an economic issue. It's not just a social issue. It's not just a political issue. It very much has big implications in the economy. On top of that, you're talking about women are 50% of the world population. We have so much to contribute, energy-wise, idea-wise, so much productivity we could do. And that's missing out of the economy. So that's also a deficit to the Chinese economy. So this is how what most people would consider a social or cultural issue or political issue actually has real impacts economically. And so this is one of the big factors that is not being discussed because nobody wants to talk about the fact that all these, female babies were missing out of the economy. And so it's not one that the media wants to openly discuss, and definitely the Chinese government doesn't want to openly discuss it. But it is actually one of the big factors causing major drag on the Chinese economy from being able to be at its full potential. So gender disparity, like I said, it does have a huge impact on it. The second one that I was going to talk about was the rise of the middle class. So why is, again, this a concern? Why is this even an issue? So let's talk about this. Typically, when you look at any of the developed economies in the modern age, they kind of have this life cycle for the economy. Okay, they go from exporting a whole lot to internal consumption, and then they go back to exporting and then back to internal consumption. Kind of just goes back and forth. Okay, so why does it do this? Well, when you're exporting, you're sending out all your goods and services, you're selling it all to other countries, their money comes into you, your goods and services go out, you get very rich, right? And then slowly your goods and services become more and more expensive. You are exporting less, but you still need to, have growth within the economy. Well, that's how you turn. This is why you turn into internal consumption. So what that means is, when I say internal consumption, is that the goods and services produced within the country are being consumed by the citizens of that country. And so a lot of it, like the US, we have, I think the last number I looked at, it's like 70% internal consumption. So 70% of our goods and services that we produce, we consume ourselves, we don't export it out. Well, China is very much, an exporting powerhouse. They have been for a long time. The problem is that they are having a hard time turning this corner to internal consumption. Like I said before, earlier in the video, they should have been, at this point, almost surpassing us in the size of the economy. We're number one in the world in the size of our economy. They're number two. It was predicted that they would be overtaking us by 2020. This is part of the reason why they're not, because they are very much stuck in the idea, well, exporting is how we made our money. And so this is how we've always done things. So this is how we have to keep doing things. No, if they turn to internal consumption, they would blow us out of the water and we would never be able to catch up. Simply for the fact that their middle class is basically the size of the entire US population. So this is why if they turn to that, we would never be able to catch up, just because of the sheer size of their population. But they're not doing that for a couple of reasons. One, again, they're kind of stuck in that mentality of, well, exporting has always worked, this is what we're going to do. But two, when you turn to internal consumption and you talk about the middle class, okay, the rise of the middle class, you're talking about not just the rise in the sense of the number of people that are defined in the middle class. You're not talking about just the income or purchasing power. You're talking about political influence. You're talking about consumer influence. I mean, they become a very, very powerful force. Well, this is part of the reason that's causing China to be hindered in turning into internal consumption, because the Chinese government has no desire to share government power with the citizens, and so they don't want that shift to happen politically. But in almost any modern economy that we see nowadays, that's what we see, is that we see a shift from concentrated government power to more power within the middle class, where they have much more influence over it. So this is part of the reason that they do not want to turn that direction, and it's causing them to be hindering really the growth of their economy to be at its full potential. Again, if they really did utilize the full power of the middle class, we would never be able to catch up to them. And so this is where these are a couple of the variables that are causing them to have economic headwinds. And again, these are not things that most people hear about in the media, and they don't think about it, but these are some big factors that are influencing what's happening in China right now. So this is why I said they can't afford a trade war. They can afford a trade dispute, which is what we were in with what the U.S. was in with China in the basically last half of last year of 2018. So, but again, it wasn't a full-on trade war because they can't afford it. They've got a big slowdown in the numbers within their workforce, and then again, that kind of power struggle with the middle class is causing some headwinds. So again, these are not things that most people would typically think about when they're talking about some of the turbulence within an economy, but you have to remember the markets, the economy, it's all based on us humans. And anything that affects us are going to affect those things. So you have to, again, see these topics through more of an economic lens, and it'll start making sense why these variables have the influence that they have in any given market or economy. So hopefully that helped to give you guys just a couple of very interesting, fun things to think about. Quick market update. So markets are doing great. Again, there's nothing really indicating any distress in the economy as a whole. The one thing that is kind of concerning me that I've been watching, keeping an eye on, is the increase in housing prices, just how fast it's been increasing. And that's just, I don't like that. That's very unsettling to me. Not only is that very reminiscent of pre-2008, but there's nothing that justifies that type of movement as quickly as it's going. And so that's something I'll be keeping an eye on. But as far as everything else in the economy, it's, again, doing well. The housing market isn't running away with the whole U.S. economy, which, again, is a good thing, because no one market sector should be running away with the whole U.S. economy. That's never a good sign. So, but other than that, it's going the way it should. We still don't see, again, any indicators for this year. There being a ton of turbulence, but as we all know, the markets are fickle because, again, they're based on us humans, and we are fickle. 2020 will be a whole nother story because that's when the elections are going to be happening. So gear yourself up for that one. That's always fun, right? Again, if you guys have any questions, let me know. Put them in the comments section below. And as always, hit the subscribe button, and I will talk with you guys later.